if you're a team of 3 or a team of 5 and you're spending now 10 or 15% of your day trying to add that structure for somebody else where you could be spending that somewhere else, like the reality is you should probably be looking for somebody else, which kind of sounds like a very mean response to that. But at the end of the day, when you're 5 people, like you just need everyone to be able to execute.
Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And, Cam, you messed me up with I'll let you get your sip. I'm supposed to take the sip of coffee when you hit record, and there's that moment when the little screen and the little red dot comes up. That's when I get my sip of coffee, and now I'm behind. So this is we're gonna blame this today on sunspots because we had some technical problems. We had some health and wellness issues. We got all kinds of things going on for the show today. We are anti-focus for today's show. So look out, folks. Who knows where we'll end up? We may end up in New Jersey. We may end up in El Paso. I don't know. But we're
just got to make sure you take that left turn in Albuquerque. Come on.
That's right. That's right. I should have taken the left turn in Albuquerque.
Which for the record, Mr. Bugs Bunny, that's how you get from Tucson to Colorado. You got to take that left in Albuquerque. It's a little south of Albuquerque, but still, I give him credit.
Well, that's where he was always going. I don't know why Bugs Bunny wanted to go that direction. They never explained that. But
green chilies. What else would you do? Come on, green chilies and turquoise.
That's your aunt wanting her turquoise up in Santa Fe. Boy, like I said, folks,
my bad.
We are all over the map today. Mercury in retrograde, end of year fun and happening. Holden, how you doing, man? I gotta at least say your name before we're like an hour into this.
No. Yeah, no, I'm having fun. Recovering from a cold, technical difficulties. We're off to a great start, but I'm excited to be on and to chat. So we'll overcome any barriers that we might face or hit along the way.
All right, man. I gotta, because I always there's certain career fields in the military. I always go, dude, what the hell were you thinking? And you were an FO, a forward observer, 13 Fox, if I remember my numbers correctly, folks. Testing my memory. And what the hell were you thinking when you signed that line? I mean, what kind of BS did the recruiter sell you, dude?
That was a great question. It wasn't a firefighter role. I think that's the first thing people guess when they hear fire support specialist. But when I was in high school, I knew I wanted to do a combat role, or at least like a physically active kind of role. And so it really came down to kind of what were the opportunities afforded to me. There was obviously the infantry route, but I wanted to kind of combine something that had a physical aspect, then also like a mental challenge, whether that be, some sort of academic level to it. And so that really boiled down to, I think, like combat medic, EOD, Cav Scout, and forward observer. Pretty squeamish, so combat medic kind of got ruled out.
Makes sense.
Are you that guy that gets the shot and you're like, oh?
No, so it's weird. I'm actually pretty good with it, but the skin and the cutting, I couldn't do it. So like if it's already done, I'm fine. I couldn't do the whole scalpel thing. So I was not going to be for me. And then EOD, I told the recruiter, I'm going to blow myself up. I do not trust myself in that role. And they're like, oh, we'll teach you, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, don't trust you. So then it really came down to like Cav Scout and forward observer. And I love the idea of a forward observer. You're with the infantry, you're walking around, but then you kind of have these additional duties of the radio. You're multitasking, you're following along on the map, doing land navigation or communicating to field artillery. And so it just felt like that kind of perfect role where I could apply some like good, solid critical thinking while at the same time feeling like I had this kind of physical or, physically demanding job at the same time.
So was it true?
Was it true? Yeah. I mean, I would say
Okay.
so. I mean, I thought I really enjoyed my job. I mean, being a forward observer was great. You have a lot of responsibilities at a, relatively low rank. Even as a specialist, I was doing, company level planning with the PL or what have you, or the company commander saying, okay, what are our routes? Where are we going to lay guns? What air assets are we going to have? Especially when I became JFO qualified. So for me, it was that really good opportunity to have a lot of things under my control at a relatively junior rank.
I was just going to ask the civilian question because you're talking about Cav Scout and Forward Observer. And those, if I was going to guess, because Dad, I'm decent at guessing off my military names. Those sound like damn close to the same job. Can I get a deeper definition between the two? Because if I had to guess, they sound the same.
Basically, same but different. I mean, so. Okay. Yeah, I mean, cavalry scouts or Cav scouts, they get to wear the spurs and the cowboy hats. They are quasi forward observers. They are typically a mechanized unit, so with like strikers and whatnot, and they'll be able to call for fire. But they are this kind of like hybrid between an infantry soldier and a forward observer. So it's a kind of a mix between the two, where a forward observer is going to be just a dedicated forward observer who is attached to an infantry company.
Think dude with binos.
There you go. Yep. All right, there we go. Dude with binos. I got it. Well, then I'll ask the normal follow-up question then, since we got the civilian stuff out of the way. How does being the dude with binos, how did that prepare you for life post-military? What were some of those lessons that you were able to kind of bottle up and take with you?
I mean, great question. I mean, the reality is, right, like the hard skills, right? Like how to communicate on a radio, how to, perform land navigation, like that doesn't translate, right? Like, let's be honest here. I'm not putting on encryption into my radios day to day.
Over.
In life. Over. Yeah, exactly. Over, out. I haven't set a Cas9 line in a long, long time. But there are obviously kind of the soft skills, and it's, sometimes it sounds cliche, and I've kind of gone back and forth on whether or not I'm jaded on the term of, the soft skills of the military translating. But at the end of the day, I mean, they do, right? I mean, leadership, being able to communicate effectively, being able to work with a team in very ambiguous tasks, right? So, when you're deployed and you say, okay, we're going to go on an 8-hour mission and we're going to stop over here, here, and here. And we have, 81 millimeter mortars. We'll have, an F-18 on station for 2 hours. Like, what should we be doing? Right? Like, incredibly ambiguous, besides the fact that you're going to go from point A to point B. But the way you solve that is really up to you and your expertise and like your best judgment, right? And likewise, a lot of the times in the civilian world or, the work world, you're just like, well, we need to get this into market, or we're trying to launch a new brand, or we're trying to do this, but like, how do we go about it? I don't know. You apply your expertise and like best judgment, and you work with the team to figure out like the best course of action. So although you're maybe not translating the hard skills, a lot of the soft skills of that kind of team dynamics and leadership and like critical thinking does apply to the civilian world.
Yeah, well, and I agree with you, and I want to stay in that bit of a theme because the not necessarily the job market per se and what a veteran brings to it, because you did a great job just then, but I want to jump more to the entrepreneur space. Yeah. Because I still run across people that they're like, oh, everybody in the Army and the military, they're all robots and they just do what they're told. And it's just such a naive thing to think that. So they hear somebody like you and they're like, well, how the heck are you? Because nobody's telling you how to run a business, how to start a business. So let's chat a bit about that, because I think that's a key element that vets bring to the table also.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that, the outside world, right? When you think of the military, you probably think of hierarchy, you think of chain of command, you think of the lower enlisted going, yes, sir, no, sir, or Roger that, sergeant. And to some extent, that is absolutely true, right? I mean, there needs to be a chain of command. You can't just have privates going like, nah, I don't really feel like showing up to formation. So there is a level of conformity to the military. But again, like at the same time, I think the U.S. military does do a good job at empowering every single rank within the military to, allow them to use their best judgment, right? I mean, even as a forward observer, right? If an officer came to me and said, "Hey, I need you to call for fire on this area," and it goes either against the rules of engagement, or I feel like that is not a quote unquote lawful order, or I don't feel comfortable, right? Within reason, right? I can't just say like, I don't really feel comfortable, I don't want to do it. But there is an onus on myself as an individual to say, is this something that, again, like if I'm the forward observer, it's my responsibility to make sure that artillery round lands in the right place. So therefore, I'm the one signing off of it. So there is left and right bounds within the military that I think are wider than probably the civilian population assumes, which works really well, I think, in the civilian world. Because in entrepreneurship, it's a lot of really, really ambiguous things and trying to figure it out. And like, I mean, startups are probably the most flat structure, right? Like I always say, like titles mean nothing. Like I'm a co-founder, that's it. Do not add any other title to that because it doesn't matter. Like I'm responding to emails. I'm customer support. I'm the web developer. I'm editing the videos. Reporting taxes and HR, right? So the idea that I'm, this senior level is like, yeah, but at the end of the day, I'm just a day-to-day ops person, especially at this stage. And so you just translate that stuff from the military into the real world of like, how do I apply structure to chaos?
Mm-hmm. Talking about the structure there, actually, I want to go a little bit deeper on this. And this first piece, I'm putting a little bit of just my thoughts on this. If one of y'all has an opinion on it, you can go. But I would wager that the percentage of quote unquote robots, as you put it, Dad, in the military is about the same as it is most organizations. And a lot of there's probably 25-30% of us that just need that structure and crave the structure and all those kind of things. And we're going to do that in the corporate world. We're going to do that in the military. My question then is, what are some of the lessons in that structure to translate from the military to the civilian world? Because I think a lot of the time we reject, like especially as entrepreneurs, we reject the bureaucracy. Like, oh, we don't need all this. We want that flat hierarchy. We want all these kind of things. But it's like, hey, if I've got a robot who is really freaking good at his job, but I need to give him his robot role, then that's hard to do inside of that flat organization. Go ahead, Holden. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I mean, I 100% agree. And you can easily see those people in the corporate world too, right? Where they're just good at completing tasks, right? They're kind of given their really tight left and right bounds. And then anything that deviates away from that, they kind of fall apart, right? Mm-hmm. I will, with fear of reprisal, kind of throw shade at investment banking and like the big finance world, right? Because I think a lot of people, and this isn't true to everyone, so I am making a blanket statement, but a lot of like IB or private equity or equity research is like you have an existing model, plug in the numbers, and it's a rinse and repeat, right? You're not really applying a lot of unique critical thought to like every single deal because it's a tried and true method. So they're just really good at taking the same process over and over again, which doesn't really apply to the startup world. So to your point of how do you work with somebody or handle somebody who struggles? I mean, I think the harsh reality is that person should probably not be in startups, right? Like somebody who strives well in startups is somebody who just does well with ambiguity and can take a very nebulous task and be able to expand on it and apply structure themselves. The people that I've seen struggle because like, when you're a co-founder or you're an early employee, it is very, very draining when you have to try to accommodate that for that individual. And that's not to say that you shouldn't, right? But you have to take that into account. If you're a team of 3 or a team of 5 and you're spending now 10 or 15% of your day trying to add that structure for somebody else where you could be spending that somewhere else, like the reality is you should probably be looking for somebody else, which kind of sounds like a very mean response to that. But at the end of the day, when you're 5 people, like you just need everyone to be able to execute kind of independently.
Yeah, I was just going to add on that. I think it's very easy to say it's like there's a spot for everybody, and teams can be very diverse, lots of different roles and all those kind of things. But there also is a certain point where it's like, yeah, but if we got 5 guys, like it's like I would be a little bit stricter about who those 5 guys are. Yeah.
Yeah, and right, like in a big corporate world where you have like 100 people, right, or 1,000 people, you can have those people who just execute really well within their scope, right? Because again, like you have 99 other people, or say 10 of the 100 are just really good executors on their thing. Great. Again, you have that bandwidth for everybody else, and you also probably have managers and managers above the managers. But yeah, at a certain point, I would say like sub 10 or sub 15 employees. Again, there is structure, and part of your role as a co-founder is to apply that, but also finding people who can still work with that ambiguity.
Yeah, that always reminds me of one of the things I still think that the Army in particular, I'm sure the other services did something very similar, but kind of that up or out thing. That was when I first came in, is when that started, and got rid of. Can you define that? Yeah, well, it got rid of the guy who, like, I'd be perfectly fine being a truck driver for the next 20 years.
Gotcha.
And a lot of the militaries around the world that I've worked with outside the U.S. still have that. And there's something to be said for, because I had some guys working for me as an engineer that dude was the best damn bulldozer driver you ever seen in your life. He could make that big multi-ton thing do cartwheels. But now he has to get promoted and he has to be in charge, and it's utter failure because he's no longer doing what he wants to do. And I think that's a great lesson in taking it into the business world is putting the people in the right places. And when you're in that startup mode, y'all are all sitting around the metaphorical kitchen table talking and exchanging ideas and thoughts and sharing the load. Are y'all still sitting around the table, or have you kind of graduated into offices now?
No, I mean, I literally just came back. So part of the reason why I'm sick is I just came back from SF on Sunday, and
that would be San Francisco, not San Special Francisco. Forces.
Correct. And I'll be with the pretentious East Coast calls the city. That's just New York, but then on the West Coast, the city is San Francisco. So you got to be really careful on what location you're at when you say the city. But we're scrappy. We're kind of in a hybrid model right now where we kind of rent out offices as needed. But I do believe in FaceTime. So with our recent hire, I flew out to SF to meet him. Spend 2 days together because there's just no replacing that face-to-face time, because there's so much that's lost over video, especially with those critical first few hires. And so, when we get into big planning sessions, we try to bring everyone around the kitchen table or the not a sponsor WeWork conference table to be able to just really spend some good solid time together to plan those things out, because you need it, right? Like from time to time, you just need everybody in the same room and have that ambiance. And I've noticed that, you spend 8 hours together 1 day or 2 days, and that can replace almost an entire week of remote work.
That's awesome. And I think I'd love to stay in that realm just because, you're in the tech industry, fintech, and everything is pushed to this virtual space. Even what we're doing right now, which, one of Camden's goals is that we'll have a studio at some point and be flying people in. But we ain't doing that now. And have you had a lesson learned in that the face-to-face personal interaction, or was it just something you felt as you've developed this business? Because you've got others that you've been part of a startup on, but specifically this one.
I don't know if it's just because I'm a contrarian, almost painstakingly so, and I also find myself slightly annoying when I can be too much of a contrarian. You would think that, I'm 31, right? Relatively young in startups, since graduating Stanford, and Stanford itself kind of known as a beacon of, advancing technology, quote unquote. But I do have a lot of, I guess, old school. I feel like I'm an 85-year-old man with some of my thoughts. I do believe in person is incredibly valuable. And from lessons learned, throughout the pandemic, it's just that loss of human connection, which sounds cliche and it sounds kind of sappy, but it's depressing. I'm working, 10 and 12-hour days, which is, I love what I'm doing, but I'm sitting within a corner of my apartment, which is about 400 square feet because I live in Manhattan. My bathroom's there, my bedroom's right there. And I see nobody, right? Besides the Zoom, but I'm just staring at my screen. And so I think one of the things that, at the beginning of the pandemic or at the beginning of starting this company, I was like, I think we can be fully remote and we just have a dispersed team and all that. And, we can make this work. But, as you go along, you just realize oh my God, I'm not it's not great for the mental health. I really don't think that fully remote is great for mental health. And some people do thrive within that, structure. So, part of it is just my own personal preference. But when you're working that many hours and you're working that hard, I think it is valuable to have another human being next to you or near you. But then you have to reconcile that with the realities of the world of we have a limited budget. We prioritize talent over location. And so, like I said, I flew out to SF because we found the right talent. And they live in SF, and we're not going to be able to move them out. But what we can do is, I can take frequent flights to SF. He can take frequent flights to New York. We can once a month bring the whole team together. And that is that kind of middle ground of, right, in the perfect world, we'd have everybody living in New York. We do, potentially 2 to 3 days in the office. Because I do like remote from time to time, especially if you have back-to-back meetings. You don't want to just be finding a conference room the entire time. But you got to work with what you got, right? So yes, 2 to 3 days in the office, everyone in New York, that's the ideal scenario, but limited funding, limited time, and limited talent pool. So then what's the next best scenario? And then you just adjust accordingly to make it work.
Well, just by being intentional like you are, you're already setting your company up for that. And I think that's something that, a lot of startups fail at. And that's the intentionality of what I want the company to look like. What would be ideal, and then what can we do now that is similar to that, or at least is a trade off. And that's a great place that you're, or a great thing that y'all are doing right now in establishing that culture. Whether you said, all right, this is our culture, or you said this is the way I want it to be, and started to create it that way. I think too many startup founders are just running and never thinking about the bigger picture. So did you gain that lesson mentoring Stanford? You have a drill sergeant, that got in your face, whatever, right?
A lot of knife handing that happened to get to that point. It's It's a little bit of everything, right? I mean, it's great mentors, it's past experiences. This is my second time, co-founding a startup. And to be fair, right? I mean, first time founders, that's the hardest thing because you know nothing. So I don't fault people for making those mistakes because you're so focused on trying to figure out everything. Like, I mean, literally, like, how do I start a company? How do I get product market fit? How do I hire? How do I file taxes? Rhode Island just sent me something. They want to know what chemicals I have in my bathroom because we work from home. Like, all those things are just so overwhelming that you just eventually, like, you get spread so thin, right? And so as a second time founder, you're not losing your cognitive power trying to think of how to run payroll or the criteria of a good hire or how to file those state things. And so you do have more opportunities to be like, okay, here were all of the mistakes I made the first time and the lessons learned. And now I can apply it. And now I can actually think about these more like high level things, whether that be culture or in-person versus remote and all that. And so it's a combination of everything. And then also just kind of, following your gut. And that's that kind of nebulous thing that can't be taught, that you just, as you get older, as you do it for longer, you start to realize, okay, this is how I feel. And then again, love the dogs. I hope there's a guest appearance from one of them. Sorry, digression aside.
They're trying their best, Holden.
Yeah.
I will not be mad. I will not be mad if there's a guest appearance. But again, it always comes down to reality versus like what you want, right? Because I've also seen founders struggle with like, well, I want this, this, and this. It's like, okay, but that's not how the real world works, right? And so how do you get where you want to be within the parameters of, what's on the ground?
Could you talk some about the communication side of that? Because I think that's something I know I experienced that. There's this thing as in a startup as the founder where you're like, okay, here's this beautiful vision, here's this thing we're working towards. Because as much as our constraints might not be even anywhere close to that, you also need to keep that vision there and make sure people are seeing the connection, still working towards it. But there's this weird kind of game of also you have to still sell where you're at. A little bit is what I ran into with that. Like, it's like, hey, we could do this and hold it in 10 years. I'm going to have you and you're going to be in this corner office where we do it all. It's like, but right now, by the way, we're remote, your minimum wage, it's this. It's like, there's a little bit of, I don't know. It almost feels like a double speak kind of thing that happens. What is your experience with communicating that in a honest and transparent way?
Yeah, I mean, to your last part, right? I think honesty is and transparency are always like the most important thing because most employees are going to see through it, right? If you start with, we're IPOing and your equity is going to be worth $20 million, right? I think the average employee is going to be like, but is it? Right? Now, obviously, you want to paint, the broader picture, right? So, for example, VetraFi, we want to say, we're the modern financial platform for service members, veterans, and their families, and we want to get to a point where we can help support people from when they enter in throughout their service and well beyond. But then, like, what does that entail? Like, what is the granular things, features, products that allow that to happen? The answer is we know what we want to launch with year 1, year 2, and to some extent year 3. But beyond that, who really knows, right? And some founders really struggle with giving that as an answer of, I don't know. One of the best answers I heard when I was at Context Ventures as an entrepreneur in residence, and we invested in this company, was a founder said, we'd asked something of along the same lines of like, where does this end up? And he goes, and I might be misquoting here, I'm not sure if this is the right product for this market, but I know there's a problem to be solved and I'm the right person to solve it.
Love that.
And like, that's all you can really ask for at this stage. You've been incorporated for what, 6 months, a year?
Right.
The idea that you've solved for the next 10 years is asinine. And if you think you've solved it for the next 10 years, I can assure you probably haven't, right? And so I think you convey that also to your employees of, this is the problem, right? We're 40% of service members are uncomfortable in their financial situation. They're 4 times more likely to be victims of payday loan lenders than the general population. And yet, given all of that, less than 1% of them are actually at risk of defaulting or going into bankruptcy. And nobody's trying to solve that. And that's what we're trying to fix. That's what we sell, is just, this is a big problem within the United States, and we have the opportunity to solve it. And we have the skills, the network, and the ability to do that. How we go about it outside of our kind of first product iteration is a mystery. But that's like for me, the joy and fun of startups is, I don't know, but we're going to figure it out together, right? And when we go live, we're going to get feedback, and we're going to learn, and we're going to see things that work well and things that don't, and then iterate and pivot as we need to. And then you just find people who are okay with that ambiguity of the idea that this is a big problem, that they're motivated to solve it, and that not everything that we do is going to be correct.
That's such an important thing, I think, for everybody to understand. We've all got to have that vision, right? That strategic, where are we going? Sort of big hand, little map sort of thing, and matched with the problem. But how do I actually get to the solving of the problem? That's the heavy lifting. And I really like the way that you describe that, because I think that's such a significant thing for people to understand. Because when you tie yourself to the problem and you tie yourself to a strategy, then you're not tied to what most entrepreneurs get tied to, is the how. Mm-hmm. And that becomes their baby, and that shouldn't be their baby. And that's where I think failure happens. Based on your other startup and your time with Context Ventures, have you seen that sort of thesis I just threw together like that?
It's probably the biggest problem, right? Where founders, and especially, first-time founders, get so latched onto the idea that their kind of first solution is the right solution, and they fell in love with that section of it. There's also probably a level of I don't want to say lack of hubris, but again, right? Nobody wants to admit that they're wrong, or that they, guessed incorrectly, right? Or analyzed it incorrectly. So that they kind of go down with the ship of, I started with this idea, and I can't deviate from that, because what does that mean to me? Does that, the investors, invested in this idea, and I mean, it was funny. My very first startup, and I'll throw him under the bus, is my first startup. We pivoted, and my dad went, but they invested in this idea. You can't pivot. They invested in this idea. Or aren't the investors going to be mad? And what's going to happen because you're now shifting your business model and all that? I'm like, no. They invested in me. They invested in the problem set. They didn't invest in the specific product that we were building right then and there. And sure enough, when I went to investors and said, hey, we're doing this. This is why we're shifting, for this reasons, and this is why we think it will be successful. They're like, yeah, cool. Thanks for letting us know. And that was the end of the conversation.
There's another tricky layer here that I feel like we haven't touched yet, which is you have the big idea, the big vision, the problem that you want to solve, all of that. You start to piece together how you're going to solve it, build in that bridge there. The thing that I think is even trickier, and maybe it's because I feel more comfortable in that area, but the tricky thing to me then is communicating that with the team and getting them to understand not only the vision and all that, but also more than understanding, like creating certainty for them, because people need certainty to operate. I need certainty to set my alarm in the morning to get up to go to work. There's got to be a little bit of certainty amongst all of that uncertainty. What have you done to try to help build that certainty for your team?
I think it's, not announcing things too early, right? There's a lot of kind of whiplash within startups, right? So there's definitely the, 1 week it's the answer is this, the second week it's this, new information comes up, it's this. So, there's definitely a level of regulation of, you don't want the company to feel like you're jerking your knee every time there's a little bit of new information. So you do want to have a little bit of a lag time between when new information arrives and when you kind of disclose it, just so there's not this idea of like, we're doing this, now we're doing this, now we're doing this, and actually now we're doing it this way instead. Because that definitely sows uncertainty of like, does Camden or just Holden know like what's even happening? The second thing is obviously like, right, financial runway, just making sure that, hey, if we hit a hiccup, always just reminding them we have, and you don't have to disclose your exact amount that's, in your bank account, but you can say we have plenty of runway. Everyone's job is safe. We, accounted for this within our financial model. There's, no real fear on that end, right? So providing assurances on the kind of job security side. But then also just, again, like reiterating that, within startups, this happens sometimes. This is still our end goal. We're going to deviate up and we're going to deviate down and things are going to pop up like this. But this is still the kind of the true marker that we're going after. And at the end of the day, there's going to be these things. So, I try to keep the team involved, whether that be our bin sponsor bank or, partnerships or what have you, and saying, this is what we've got on the roadmap. This person came back with a no, but these people came back with a yes, or we're this close to potentially finalizing this deal, or, we're extending the search by an additional 2 months, but this is why. So yes, we're delayed by 2 months, but this doesn't affect us. We already kind of allocated that it was going to be between this quarter and this quarter. So we're still on schedule. And, this is what steps we're taking to kind of reduce the amount of impact that that's going to have on the company.
Man, that's well said, and such a great lesson that I think everybody should listen to. I've always talked about one of your roles as a leader is not to be a conduit of information, but to be a filter of it, and knowing what your team needs to hear in order to keep them engaged, interested, and feeling safe. Remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, folks. Feeling safe in that role, and not safe like the saber-toothed tiger is going to come eat you, but that you'll be able to pay rent and make a mortgage payment and put food on the table. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, your line of, you're not a conduit of information, but a filter, right? And I think some people might hear that as like, well, is that counter to transparency? But I don't think so, right? Like, being a filter of information doesn't mean you're not being transparent. You're just clarifying, I think, information to make sure that it's less muddy, because a lot of the leadership role is just figuring out the muddy water. And then, to continue with this analogy, being the carbon filter, say, all right, muddy water's here, I'm going to get clean water, and then be able to provide that to the employees.
Yeah. Where, and I want to open this up for both y'all, but I'm curious how y'all think the idea of burning the boats fits into that. Because one of the examples that always comes to mind, Dad, I told this story before, was in my Verby days of I learned the difference of being a filter versus just being fully transparent. Because I talked to my co-founder about, hey, if we don't sell enough tickets this Friday, we're probably done. And he did not work very well that week because he was freaking out. And I was like, oh, okay, there's a big leadership lesson there. But there is an aspect of like, hey, we all need to be in this together. We're burning the boats. We are committing to this. Let's get this all done. But then there's that need for safety at the same time. Holden, I'll throw it to you first. How do you think as a leader you can balance those two? Because there is a need. I would say that, at least in my experience in the startup world, if you're going through that big transformation, there's a need for that burn the boats moment a lot of the time.
No. And I think it comes down to just adjusting depending on the employee, right? Right. If it's a fellow co-founder, you two are in it together. And so then you both are taking on those responsibilities at the same time. If it's titles are meaningless within startups, but if it's a director level or VP level or lead level, right, there's probably a less of a filtering of the sense of, right, you kind of need to know things are about to hit the wall or hit the fan in order to understand the severity that we're in, right? So that you can then ensure that you put the right pressure onto the people below you, right? And again, it depends if you have 5 employees, 10 employees. So there's a little bit of nuance to this, right? But if it's just your regular, engineer or UI UX or your regular salesperson, then there should be a greater filter applied to your communication to them. So I think it kind of just depends on where on that ladder, even though it is, kind of a flat structure, what the roles and responsibilities are, because the higher up they are in the role, the more that they should be at least aware of the situation, and also senior enough to be able to interpret bad news and not let that affect their performance.
Well, I'll say something. I'm not a fan of that metaphor, because if you truly take it in the literal sense of burn the boats, then you eventually get to a fight or flight mode, right? Because now, okay, I cannot get back home where safety is, or either I get this job done or I'm fired. It becomes this extremism, and I don't believe people perform in the right way. That's one of the reasons I've always been against VCs who are like anti-plan B. That's okay. Yeah. So I'm not allowed to pivot like you just said you did, Holden. Does that mean that if I get a new piece of data or the environment changes, I got to keep going down this way? That's, to me, that's what burn the boats means. I mean, what I want a team that's fully in and committed and sees themselves in the future, and they're excited about themselves and their future and the growth and all these sort of opportunities, and they're willing to work their ass off to it, as opposed to, hey, dude, either you make that sale or you're fired. Mm-hmm. That's what burn the boats. That's how I translate burn the boats.
Ultimatums, I think, are really tough, right? And I think should be used with extreme caution, if not almost basically never, right? To your point, right? I think so much of leadership and to the same extent, like startups, right? Operating a startup is being 80% certain that you're making the right decision, right? Because, take, for example, the military, right? You're going to call for fire. You have like probably 80% certainty that you have all the correct information. But there's just so many unknowns. Like, could be something I'm not seeing. Could be a hill. Could be some anti-air on a mountain that I don't know about. Right? There's a million other factors. And likewise in the startup world, if you are picking a vendor or you're deciding how your business model is supposed to be running, you do your research, you look at frameworks, you see how other people have done it. But then there's still a laundry list of I don't knows. So can you get to that 80% confidence and then make a decision? But if anyone criticizes you on it, it's I made the best decision I could with the information provided. And it could be right, it could be wrong, but I made the right decision based off that information. There's a great case study out there with, I think it was the FedEx CEO went to Vegas with the last $8,000, gambled it on blackjack or craps or roulette, and won money, right? Basically doubled it or tripled it or what have you, saved the company. And so it was a good outcome. So then people go, well, was that a good decision? It's no, it was a horrible decision. It had a good result, but it was a horrible decision because you just gambled it, right? And like, I think likewise with decisions or having to pivot or whatever, it's like, as long as you can have a good solid rationale, like that's the right decision. Whether or not it pans out good or bad is a different story.
I think there's something else I kind of want to drill into, talking about the, not using the fear, putting them in the fight or flight and giving them the ultimatums. I totally agree there. My thought then is, okay, it's like, well, then how are we going to motivate people? How are we going to get people moving? Dad, you talked about the vision. The problem I've experienced with the vision, and we talk about purpose, mission, vision alignment all the time with Tribe and Purpose. Like, this is not me, this is not blasphemous. This is just a real, like, hey, this is what I see. Let's talk about how you solve it. Because the problem with the vision painting is there's a lack of urgency, I think, in a lot of people. That it's like, hey, can we get there? Yes, Holden, I believe you. We're going to do this. We're going to help veterans in financial trouble. We're going to go do all these things you're talking about. That's all great. And then it's like, okay, well, then how do you get that urgency out of me to go fight for it? Well, it's like, well, hey, if you do this, then you can, here's the carrot. You can go make this money. You can go be COO once we hire more people and all this you can lay that all out, but without the certainty of the structure to get there. You have the plan. We all agree on the plan, all that kind of stuff. There is belief, but there's still the urgency, I think, kind of lacks there. What are your thoughts on that, Holden? How do you think you can kind of connect those two dots?
I'll give you the cop-out answer first, and then I'll try to provide a
Perfect.
better answer.
There we go. I'll mark it for a clip too. We're good.
Yeah, please. Quote me on this. Unless it sounds bad, then cut it. The immediate answer would be you kind of have to hire that out, right? Like you do want to be able to look for those traits in a candidate during the hiring process who has that intrinsic motivation. And to a large extent, that's a lot of what the military does, right? There's the external, you're going to go to jail if you don't show up to formation, or you're going to get smoked or whatever. But like, it's 2 a.m, you've had an hour of sleep, and you're about to go on a mission. Like, you kind of need a little bit of intrinsic motivation to be like, I got to do this, right? Like, I'm here for the team. I'm here for the mission, and we have a job that needs to be done, and I'm here to do it. So to some level, employees that get hired at this stage, you want to be able to sell the vision, the idea, the opportunities, and the growth. But I do think to some extent, you can't teach that intrinsic motivation, right? Like, you either have it or you don't, or you develop it over time. I was a terrible student growing up. I didn't always have that, but through the military and my experiences, I learned to harness it and adjust my personality and adjust my kind of frameworks to have that myself. And so when we hire people, I think we look for it as well, that, here's the vision, here's the idea, but also, are you going to be able to carry it the last quarter mile, right? And are you going to be able to double down when things get tough? That's the cop-out answer of, hopefully you don't ever get to a point where like you're fighting to get that person to care. Because if that's happening, it's probably just not a good fit for the company. Yeah. And now, so for the longer answer, or the more nuanced answers, there's probably like some middle ground, right? Of like some level of motivation. And I think that's, making sure they're working on things that they, personally enjoy. With a lot of our engineering stuff, I don't tell them, hey, it needs to be this specific framework and we need to do it this way. On a high level, yes, we're going to build with React Native. We're going to use AWS. We're going to use TypeScript and all that. But on certain like package modules, or an engineer comes to me and it's like, hey, I really want to try to build it this way or use this program instead. I go, what is the cost? What is the timeline? And why do you think that that's the best way to implement this? And so if they can answer those questions, and I don't feel strongly one way or the other, go do it, right? Mm-hmm. So allowing them to work on things in the way that they want to work on it, I think builds that like last maybe 25% of motivation, is that you're not just being told what to do, but you're doing it in a way and you have enough flexibility to make it enjoyable for yourself as well. Because if an engineer gets to learn a new platform or a language or a new package, and that gives them that motivation, go right ahead. I'm not going to tell you how to do it, because at the end of the day, you're the one implementing it.
Yeah. I was just going to say I think there's an interesting thing talking about the analogy that keeps coming to mind, or metaphor, whichever. I don't know which one on this one, Dad. I didn't think about it enough. But the idea of running the marathon. But the tricky thing as a CEO of a startup is you don't really know when that deadline is. It's like we don't know how many miles we're running, and it's hard to get somebody who's going to work at that consistent pace for it. It's one thing to say, "Hey, Holden, I don't know how long we're going. We could walk." That's the lack of urgency I'm talking about. It's not that we don't care, but it's like, we can walk. We don't know how long we're going. Might as well just walk, and we'll get there eventually. Go. Yeah.
yeah. No, sorry. It gets me excited because I mean, so another thing that I see first time founder or just founders in general, right? One of the struggles is nobody's going to care more about the company than you, and that's just the reality, right? So there is a level of. I've seen founders, this person's not working that hard. And like, maybe they're just a bad employee, right? That could definitely be the case. But to another extent, I think it's unfair for co-founders or founders, what have you, to expect the same level as in 100% dedication, grit, grind as you. Because you have the most equity. You have the most, care and stake in the pot, right? Because you started it was your idea, you're leading it, you pitched to the investors, you got the money, what have you. And so to expect employees to be at that exact same level, I think is a bit of you're going to set yourself up for failure, right? They should be working hard, they should be grinding, they should be giving it their all. But I think if you're like, well, I'm doing this, I was up till 4 a.m. getting a podcast released, I don't expect my employees to be up till 4 a.m. doing that, right? I mean, maybe once in a while we're coming up to a deadline, right? We need to get released on test flight before Thanksgiving. And I was expecting, like, guys, we need to hit it this week, right? And I saw the extra effort. But for that to be that marathon level of, grit and determination, it's like, no, but I have the most equity. I'm running the company. I raised the money, et cetera. So I think aligning expectations is important.
I got one more follow up on that, and to use the running metaphor analogy, whatever, on that. Holden, would you prefer, in your experience, talking about somebody who's jogging consistently at that same rate, or is there a benefit to what I would call, if y'all remember running in high school and stuff, the modified mile, where you sprint the straights, jog the curves? Is there some value to a team that works like that? What are your thoughts there?
Oh, that's such a good question.
Man, here I'm going to throw something at
you. Otis, you go first because I can answer this like 5 different ways. So Otis, you go first, and maybe it will help formulate my thoughts.
It's fartleks. Remember fartleks? Or I think we used to call them Indian runs.
Oh yeah, like back and forth. No.
Never knew why. Around. But if you think about that, you're sprinting, but your time and distance to sprint is really changing as the group, accordions, speeds up, slows down. In that sense, you are sprinting for an unknown distance each time. Yeah, there may be 10 people in the group, but that 10 people may be, butt to nut, or they may be, 3 meters apart, whatever it is. And it's going to change each time. But each time that you're that guy that's doing the sprint, you've got to go. So I don't know if that's that might be a closer metaphor for because if we're doing straights and curves, that's every Tuesday we're going to work till midnight. Okay. Yeah, maybe. But do we always have to work till midnight on Tuesday? Right. So that's the way I'd look at the modified mile and not to just stay in that kind of sprinting metaphor.
Yeah.
I'm glad you went first, Otis, because I would tag on to that because I was going back and forth. I mean, it's either, you have some people on your team that are just really good marathon runners. You have others on your team that are really good sprinters. But I think the metaphor that Otis used is probably the more apt comparison in the sense of like, everyone's going to need to sprint at some point, and then you just need to find a pace where everyone can, catch their breath or maintain a healthy level of cadence, right? Because you don't want people burning out. That's the worst thing in the world. So how do people catch their breath but then have that opportunity to sprint when they need to? And sometimes, like Otis said, you don't know how long that's going to be, but you do know that you're going to be able to catch your breath at some point and run a slower pace when needed.
Yeah. Yep. And I just came up with, I had what I learned, but now I'm going to have to put it in my future rugby coaching log for fitness training in the Indian runs, because I don't remember ever doing it this way, where you might do 3 or 4 at a time instead of talk about changing it up. Camden's thinking about it right now. He's going to call Coach Duffy here when we hang up, because think about that. If you're going 1-1-1 all the time, but what if you do 2 or 3? Mm-hmm. Getting it in the head, right? It's not a set pattern that we need to follow, and I think that's such an important piece of life, because life, we want it to be nice and simple and in a pattern, but it's always changing. Things are always changing. So you got to be ready for things to change. That's one of the ways you can do that, is by what's the variety? What's the the X factor of it, the unknown of it that I can throw in, and how far are we going? Or is it 6 people going this time, or is it 1 person going this time? Mm-hmm. So that's what I learned. Camden, how about you? What did you learn?
I've learned that when you start talking rugby drills specifically, it is really hard for me to focus, because I am thinking about how I want to run some drills, and I got a whole month to think about it because we're off for Christmas break. But no, what I learned, and actually staying in the coaching world, it's funny talking about the urgency and the modified mile there at the end in that example. The thing that Holden, you said, and really kind of occurred to me, is it's like how much of it is just personality type. You talk about like selecting for it and stuff, because there's this phrase that is so cliche, but it is so freaking true, which is you can't coach effort. And there's a certain point where I can't light the fire. And if you don't want to be there, you don't want to be there. And there is a certain point, like I'll use a specific example, because I'll use this with the U of A boys. I'll use this when I coach high school. I'll use this when I'm coaching my little kids with Engage. Hey, if you don't want to do this, then we're done. That's it. Holden, do you want to play rugby or not? What happens, I'll tell you, at the U of A, they go, yes, sir, I want to play. And it's all right, well, then get your shit together. Let's go to work. What happens occasionally with the little kids at Engage is they go, well, I don't want to be here. My mommy made me. And there's this really weird spot there where I can't make that kid want to play, right? And oh my gosh, you talk about a pivot. That is a hard adjustment when you have that one-liner ready to go and they hit you with, I don't want to be here. That's a tough one. But anyway, the point being, you can't coach that effort. And you really, there's a certain point where you could select for it, I think would be the nuance that, Holden, you would add to that. But you really can't coach that. That's something that has to be there for them.
Yeah. And, you can't coach it unless you're in the military where you have no other choice, right? Because you go into basic training, I don't want to be here. They go, too bad. You're going. Yeah. And so I think there are, right. And, I know we're coming up on time, so I don't want to beat the dead horse or go into that digression. But I mean, I will say, I didn't have that. I was that kid in Little League and in middle school and in high school where the second it got tough, I went, I'm done. I'm good. Don't want to be here, right? And so there was something that clicked within basic training. And maybe that is that drill instructor knife handing me or yelling at me, or just literally the company commander going, I am giving a lawful order that no one's allowed to quit. And, sometimes when that choice is literally removed from your opportunities or vocabulary or choice or what have you, it can kind of flip that switch and force you to become that self-motivator or that get that intrinsic motivation. Mm-hmm. But it is rare, and not for this to be a recruiting ad for the military or the Army. Go Army, beat Navy. That's this weekend. I had to throw that one in there. But there's opportunity, but it's very, very rare. And yeah, you just got to find it, right? what I learned.
Yeah, I was just gonna say-
No, I got to add.
I want to add one thing. I was going to say,
See, that's why I have to ask, because Camden's now got something you got to throw out there.
I was just going to say, come on, we're talking about burning the boats. Sometimes when you burn the boats, you starve on the island. Like it's like you got to understand your situation there.
Yep.
Yeah. What about you, Holden? What'd you learn?
What I learned, so I had it written down for a while, was the a leader's role is to filter information, not be a transmitter of information. That's a line that has really stuck with me. But then at the very end, the last few minutes, it was the modified mile metaphor. So I don't know if I can pick two, but for the longest time it was that.
That's all right.
The second one, and then at the very end, the modified mile, I thought was a great analogy.
Yeah, I think we all jumped onto that one. That
Exactly.
Yeah, my head's still getting around that one. And why the hell we call them fart licks?
I was going to say, you're making a joke. Why do we call them Indian runs? Why are they called fart licks? Neither one of those makes sense.
No, I don't know. Maybe write us, folks. Help educate us. Help
exactly. Get the little.
Something new. So, Holden, man, how do folks find you? Learn more about VetraFi and see what's going on.
No, find me on LinkedIn, VetraFi, VetraFi.com. We actually just started a podcast called In the Field. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and anywhere you find your podcast streaming. That's In the Field podcast. That's basically it. LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all the fun ones. You'll find either VetraFi, myself, or In the Field.
Are you doing the finance dance on TikTok? Is that what you?
Not yet. Our marketing people have not been able to convince me to do it yet. I also, like I said, I'm an 8-year-old at heart, so I just don't know if I'm hip enough to be doing those trends.
Holden, it's been a lot of fun having you here today. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure.
Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Holden Lindblom, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so that they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive episodes available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again. We'll see you all next time.